Greetings, everyone, and welcome to an important discussion today. We are going to explore issues of EdTech vision versus reality, also known as the EdTech disconnect. My name is Matthew Mugo Fields. I am a general manager of supplemental and intervention solutions at HMH. Before we jump into the discussion, I just wanted to point out that you will have the option to ask questions via the Q&A and interact with each other via chat. So we want to encourage folks to jump in the chat right now, shout out where you're from, what city you're from, what school you're from, etc. Give your hometown a big shout out in the chat. We want to get the conversation going that way. Remember, if you have a question later on for our panelists, ask it through Q&A. Okay, so here's the deal. This is one of these topics that we actually thought up pre-COVID, but arguably is even more important and more timely in today's environment. In the sort of language of many of us who do software development and product development, here's kind of an entry path for our problem statement. So in recent years, EdTech has undeniably been experiencing tremendous growth, however you want to measure it. You want to measure usage, you want to measure penetration, you want to measure the amount of EdTech solutions that are used in the average classroom. You want to talk about even the valuations of companies and indeed attendance at summits such as this one. EdTech is booming and growing. However, perhaps paradoxically, during that same period of time, we just received a national report card that said students' achievement is down in both reading and math. More in reading than math, but down in both. So how do we square this? How do we think about the growth in our industry, the growth in our solutions, the dynamism that exists? Hey, prior to my current role, I was an EdTech entrepreneur, and I know that many of us get into this work for all the right reasons. We want to leverage innovation, we want to leverage research to create tools that assist our partners in generating outcomes for kids. I know that this work is too hard for you to do it for any other reason. However, we also got to acknowledge the fact that results matter, outcomes matter. And if we look at those outcomes, we don't necessarily see a direct connection between the outcomes generated for students and the growth in many of our solutions and companies. Again, that was pre-COVID. We were having that conversation. And then with COVID, you can argue this question, this need is even more acute now. We are in a situation where our solutions are needed now more than ever. And we got to make sure that we deliver on the promise. Said another way, we got to make sure that vision becomes the reality. So we've gathered together a group of experts with differing perspectives on this question of vision versus reality in EdTech. And we want to have them jump in and do most of the talking. We're not going to have we're not going to ask them to introduce themselves and read their bios. You can do that. You all have Google. You can search who these people are. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves via one question. And that question is, tell me how COVID and all of the sort of related issues and challenges has changed your work. How has COVID most significantly changed your work? That'll give you an opportunity to understand a bit about the work that these folks do, and then we'll get into the issues of vision and reality. So why don't we start with you, Sonia?
Thanks, Matthew. Good afternoon. It's great to be here with everyone. And what I would say with regards to COVID in my work is prior to March 15th, I worked in a school district, lead a school district where we had a 1-to-4 ratio of device to student. So that meant, we had about 4 students per device, and that usually was somewhere within the building. And literally overnight, we went from about 10 to 15% of our teachers regularly using technology with that 1-to-4 device ratio to probably post March 16th, needing to stand up 10,000 Google Classrooms in less than a week, and needing to move that ratio from 1-to-4 much closer to 1-to-1, and then hitting smack into broadband challenges that have been well documented. I think the biggest shift for us is that technology went from being a nice to have, maybe a side dish, to now being the mode by which we were going to be able to educate, connect with a school district of about 79,000 students. And so literally our world shifted overnight. And our reliance on technology and all that it's able to do has now become really a primary focus on how we're lifting our work. So I'd say that's how our world has changed.
Great, great, great. Thank you for that. Why don't we stick with the superintendents? And Tom, why don't you tell us how COVID has most changed your work?
Good afternoon, everyone. So for us, when we were at some level of implementing one-to-one, and we had this theoretical framework for what it would look like when we completed it all. Unfortunately, with the demand on devices, just production didn't meet demand, so we were left short of devices. And what it really has done for us is it's exposed those areas that we thought might have been weak areas, but truly were areas that we were deficient in. This whole idea of supporting students, for us, the group would be our low-income students, really being able to prepare to support those low-income students and families. It's just a deficit of ours. And then in addition, just the SEL, just the social emotional learning for our students, but not only that, then the mental health and well-being of our staff. We thought we were doing really well in terms of how we do that. And this really exposed that we don't do that very well. And we don't have a system that really can help scale up. It's not a matter of us making what we do, doing more of what we do. It's a matter of reinventing everything we do. So those would be the two areas. It really has exposed those weaknesses. And then the worst time to shore up a weakness is in a crisis. Often you're making decisions based on limited information with limited resources, and you're just putting in something that would work. But most schools and stick with that for a long time, because once you have something, it's really difficult to get rid of something. So it's kind of a catch-22 for us right now.
Yeah, that's right. Inertia is real. Why don't we turn to you, Heidi? So you're a serial Edtech entrepreneur, now running a fast-growing education technology company. How has this crisis changed your work?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. And our company's called Writable. So we're aiming at increasing student proficiency in writing. Like you said, reading and math have taken a turn for the worse, while writing is really faring no better. So that's kind of what we think about every day. But change hasn't really changed, it's intensified. I'd say we're extremely focused on meeting districts with where they are. And I think you'll hear today on the panel that everyone's at a different spot. That's become insanely clear. There's no even three, shades of gray of customers. So you really have to get very real time, very kind of connected to the point of use with where teachers are at with their program. Our time of day has changed with usage during COVID. So software changes have increased, but our goal is so that the changes never feel super alarming for our customers. We need technology to fit in with kind of how they live, work, and breathe. And because that's changed for everyone, we've kind of had to shift fairly quickly in this time. So
got it. Yeah, I can definitely agree with you on that. And then last and certainly not least, we're going to turn to our scholar, our researcher of the crew here, and that's Bart, who also has a background in education technology, but now you're spending a lot of your time really thinking and working with folks at University of Virginia on evaluation of EdTech. So Bart, how has this crisis changed your work?
Well, thank you, Matthew. It's great to be with everybody today. I'd say the most consequential change has been the realization that EdTech has gone from a nice to have to a must have in ways that we never anticipated or wanted. We did research this summer, a nationally representative sample of educators nationwide, and we heard loud and clear that students are diverging in their competencies in ways that have never been presented before in the classroom. This presents an unprecedented need for differentiation and personalization in ways that are just not feasible for a single human to do without technology. And so what we are hearing is that EdTech is become far more important, and also the amount of support that teachers need is going through the roof, and the resources available from their schools during a time of crisis are plummeting. So this puts teachers in a really difficult spot, and students are no longer in an equal playing field sitting in a classroom together. Some of them, as you may have heard, don't want to have their video cameras on because of their home environments. And simply giving a broadband device to a student doesn't all of a sudden magically make it possible for them to use technology they haven't been trained on. So at our work at the EdTech Evidence Exchange, we're focused on trying to discover what are the contextual factors that make EdTech perform differently in different places. And I only wish that we would have started doing this work 5 years ago so that we'd have more data available now to share.
Got it. Got it. Well, thank you for getting started. Your work is important. I want to shift the conversation now back to this notion of vision versus reality. So we have a lot of education entrepreneurs, executives, et cetera, folks out there in the audience who are focused on their own visions, bringing their visions to life. And that's important. Leadership requires some sense of vision. But I want to start with you, Tom and Sonia, to understand your EdTech vision. You were confronting an unprecedented crisis. You had to have some sort of vision as you were confronting it. What was that vision? And if so, how has it shifted in these last few months? And why don't we start with you, Tom?
So, originally my vision was a systemic approach to the use of technology to support teacher and instruction. I'm a strong believer that technology can be additional tools as long as they're aligned in a way that helps support teachers. I've had this fantasy for a long time that the technology would not be siloed. It would be not only provide the whatever the service was, whether it be a remediation, intervention, additional exploration for students, that it would also then tie right back into our assessment system. So that after that assessment was over, the student and the teacher would then get something, right? It would get like the recommended video or the recommended work to get done. So that was my hope, that at some point, instead of these siloed pieces that we keep bringing in and trying to stack on top or next to each other, that there'd be the systemic approach here. Because of COVID, and I don't know that technology is available just yet, but because of COVID, what's happened is now it's a matter of making sure that we're providing what we would consider the bare minimum to students so they can be successful without us. Our remote learners don't receive a tremendous amount of support from our teachers. They're doing the best they can, but they're teaching full-time in person. And then to add on top of that, the remote learners, it becomes quite a burden for them. And that's where we're staffed right now. So for me right now, it's about how do we provide at least the bare minimum for those students so they can be successful in the academic environment.
Got it. Got it. Sonia, what about you?
Yeah, so I would say pre-COVID, for us, technology was really the major lever we were trying to use to really kind of integrate our work as we took kind of a whole child approach, right? So that's kind of one of our shifts. And by whole, I mean, like, how do we actually get profiles, knowledge of students on multiple multiple levels, and kind of bring those together so that teachers have better information, principals have better information that they can use. I think post-pandemic, or mid-pandemic, God, I wish we were post, but mid-pandemic, I would say where we are now is that is actually even more urgent, right? That this ability, because what's happening is kids are coming in, and one of my favorite examples is, an honors student who lives alone with his grandmother was cut off in the spring just because grandma didn't know how to actually get on. I don't consider myself, a tech aficionado, but we have folks who don't know how to open the computer, don't know what the space bar is, right? That kind of varying level. And so I think where we are now is, one, as Tom said, we have a lot of foundational pieces in just connecting, but we also have a greater need for the integration of information, because the equity issues that are touched upon in that, and I go back to that one student who was an honor student, was honors in math, was doing advanced math, well, is suddenly now disconnected from school for 3 months because of other kind of challenges, getting, quote, logged on, getting connected. That student just returned back to school in September. Has he now ceased to be an honor student just because our data systems aren't talking to one another? And then to the point of, how do you meet a student when they come to you is tied up in something that, as you referenced earlier, a single individual who's also under duress, i.e. teachers, right, now have even more to manage. So you want them to not only manage information from multiple vantage points, but then you want them to turn that around and actually create an individualized or tailored experience for kids. And so for us, it's been this question of, how do we leverage technology in ways we hadn't thought of before? Because, as I said, we didn't have the one-on-one that we're close to now, and actually make teachers' loads easier, make school leaders' loads easier. But trying to do that all in the current situation means a greater reliance on technology.
Yeah. A lot of what I hear you saying has to do with honoring a similar vision, but using the tools to help give people the time to actually make it possible to implement and execute, right? Because those teachers that you mentioned, they're going through a pandemic too. They've got kids too. Yeah. All right. On this notion of vision, Heidi, you're an entrepreneur. Vision is essential. What is and what was your EdTech vision?
Yeah, and the vision for us hasn't changed. It's just, it's the balance between how do we deliver really authentic learning experiences at scale, right? So just because we're in a pandemic doesn't suddenly mean we shift how we look at reading comprehension to a playlist of reading and multiple choice quiz questions, right? Like for us, if you're going to learn to write, you have to write, right? So we do writing. Writing is kind of like graphing in math. You've got to do it to learn it. So we're really focused on, how do we continue to give teachers what they need to deliver those authentic learning experiences at scale? But the tension is, you have to do it with less teacher time, right? So teacher time is a scarcity. They're working from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., many of them crying at their kitchen tables. We've had people in tears. You can't ask them to do more and more and more. So really our vision is, how do we balance those two? And they are often at odds. How do we save the teacher time? How do we, though, still make sure that the learning actually has to even be more engaging now, right? Because it's harder to connect with a student when you're not seeing them face to face. So that's our vision. It has been before, continues to be, but the way those features look now, and the software that delivers that has to be different, right? So
got it. Yep. So Bart, I'm going to ask you to touch on this issue of vision, because in a way, in creating the EdTech Evidence Institute, I've gotten that last word wrong, but you know what I mean. You're an entrepreneur of sorts as well. But you're also going to help bridge us to this conversation about reality. So first talk about your vision, and then bring us to the reality of where do we stand. Begin the conversation on reality and what's actually happening in EdTech right now.
Sure. I'd start by saying that I am an entrepreneur. Before launching the EdTech Evidence Exchange, I led the first EdTech accelerator that was focused on efficacy research around a venture fund. I spent 10 years helping to build and run the world's largest online tutoring and homework help service. I was an early executive at the Princeton Review. My vision for EdTech has always been the same, and that is for technology to do for teachers and students what it has done for participants in every other sector of the economy, and that is make them more productive and efficient with less effort. And we are struggling somewhat with achieving that in the education space. when education technology is well designed, well selected, well implemented, and well supported, it can be transformative. But when it is used poorly, it can be overwhelming and distracting and counterproductive. And we've experienced the stress test of the pandemic, and it's clear now that we have no choice but to mature our choices and our processes around education technology. And as Tom mentioned, the worst time to try to do this is when you're in the middle of a crisis. And now is not the time for most districts to launch major new platforms or programs. It's an active emergency of a type that we've never seen before. And as we just heard, many teachers have kids. And so in addition to teaching dozens of kids online and trying to keep them engaged, they're the primary caretaker for their own children. And it's really important to remember that in the best of times, implementing new education technology is a lot of work. And that's when all of the teachers and the administrators and the tech support and the training, they're all in the same school. Now they're all remote. And those things are making inequities even more apparent. When we put out some survey data recently, a quote I included was from the famous investor Warren Buffett, who once said, "You only find out who's been swimming naked once the tide goes out." And when the pandemic hit, some districts contacted us and said, well, how do we pick X, Y, and Z and get it implemented within the next month? And the answer is, if you haven't spent the last several years building those muscles and the capacity and plans and training and evaluating different programs, you need to really be cautious and take small measured steps. And most importantly, to make sure you have the support of your educators. Teacher agency is one of the most important factors that we study. And so when it's done right, I think we're very, very confident that it can help us get out of this pandemic and recover.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's absolutely important. We'll come back to issues around implementation in a second, Bart. So Sonia and Tom, in the spirit of the kind of framing I gave earlier, that hey, we've got all this EdTech growth and usage, and certainly now in the midst of the pandemic, record numbers, yet we still appear to be struggling in profound ways, documented all over the place in media. Give us some inside your world view on the pain points that you have relative to EdTech. Where is the pain? What is it? You hinted at some of it already, but help us understand better from the perspective of leaders in your seats. What's the pain? Tom, why don't you take that one first?
So, I would agree with Bart. In the best of times, it's hard. The reality is the system of school, right, is not designed for these major implementations of technology or innovation. Really, because we have X amount of time, we have filled that time or overfilled that time already with things that we do. And so what we try to do then is take this wonderful concept, and we're going to integrate it into what we do, and we're going to fit that into what we're currently doing, often without taking something else away and not providing the time, because providing additional time takes additional resources. And so to do those additional resources, the cost of that product is not only the cost of the product, it's also then all those additional training hours or what you're giving up. So first of all, when I say this, I'm prefacing what I'm going to say, because I don't blame technology or the entrepreneurs for any of this. I think it's a system issue. And I want to tell you, I'm part of the problem, right? So if you ask me the 3 things we're working on, I can tell you. If you ask me which one of those 3 things I want to go up, I can tell you none of them. Because I think those are the 3 most important things. I deeply believe those are 3 most important things. But on the other hand, I'd really like to do a robust implementation of whatever product we're currently implementing at this point in Schoology, which we did not do during the pandemic. I wanted to let you know that. Technology is often presented as the solution to one of my problems. But it really isn't always a solution to my problem. It's a solution to an outcome. So the problem may be much deeper, and I buy this technology product to solve this problem, but I never really solve the problem, right? I'm trying to adjust the outcome. So when I work with technology vendors, I ask them to partner with me. When I say partner, I mean I want them vested in our success. Because if they have a vested interest in my outcome, then they will say, maybe you should first do A before you bring us on, because even if you bring us on, this is going to be a problem. Now, I can tell you, in most of the time I've had those conversations, that is not a comfortable conversation for them. They want to provide their product and they want to move on. Again, fully support us in the product, all those things, but that's not what I want. I'm presenting you what I think is my problem, and oftentimes I don't really know what my problem is. So that instead of you providing me a solution, what you've provided me is more problems. So technology, it's the old Homer Simpson quote, beer, the solution to and the cause of all problems in the world, right? Technology, the solution to and cause of all problems in my district. So when I think about technology, I'm very cautious about implementing anything. When I say, I've got this issue, I want you to help me solve it. And when they bring me the product, I've got to be really, really cautious about making sure, are you solving the outcome or the problem? Because the problem may be core instruction, right? So the product's not going to change core instruction of what I do. And then when my board says, well, we invested $100,000 or $1 million in this product, why are our test scores going up? We're going to blame the product, right? Because we, and again, I say the collective we're certainly not going to blame ourselves, right? Because then the problem always lie here, and I don't want you that. I brought you in to take care of it. So the big thing is, I think, reframing, at least when I work with any vendor, I try to partner with them, is you have to be vested in my success, and I will be equally invested in your success. We will do all the promotion you need. We will brag about this. We'll publish our results. We'll do all of it. But I need that partnership, and I need you to make sure that we're thinking through the problem together. If you've been in 100 schools or 1,000 schools or 10,000 schools and you've implemented this, and my school is kind of like these other schools, when some have had success, some haven't, why? And make sure you're sharing that information with me.
That's great, Tom. Thank you. That's real talk too. Sonia, what about you?
So, my pain point, I think, within all of this is, technology at its fundamental level, right, is a tool. It can help push the work, but it also is going to be used in ways based on, and developed, frankly, in ways based on folks' frame of the issue. So to Tom's point, depending on how you frame the issue, that's how you're going to develop your tool and tell me I can use the tool. Well, serving large numbers of low-income students, students of color, one of my major pain points now is this kind of push towards, okay, we have kids that have already been underserved in schools for long periods of time. We know where our country is right now with regards to what this present time is revealing about ongoing struggles. And so what that in education circles produces is this kind of knee-jerk reaction to say, well, we're either going to deal with the social emotional needs of these kids because they're so overwhelming, right? And so, oh my gosh, we're just going to have, they're going to have to repeat grades. They're just so overly traumatized that we have to spend all our time on that. Or you select, we're actually going to continue to teach. And right, so one of the things that I often say is I'm not in either or discussions. I'm in both and discussions. And often for kids of color and communities of color and low income communities, we give them either or choices. And so what I'm looking for in my technology partners are people who are going to help me frame in the same way that I'm directing our district, in even pre-COVID and now even more after, right, or in the midst of COVID. And that is, look, this is about acceleration. I look at these 79,000 students in the middle of this pandemic the way that I would my 3 girls. And that is, we're not talking about repeating grades because you had a rough 3 months, right? It means how are you framing the questions? How are you framing the answers? I think reflecting some of what Tom said, your answers have to then be connected to this acceleration frame. And so the partners that I think we're working on are people who come, right, who understand that's the target, that's the goal. If you're, and again, since we're in the mode of straight talk, so thank you, Tom, for talking straight, right? Just to be frank, like the partners I want to partner with are people who understand that and aren't just rehashing their own remediation paradigm, but understand that the realm of where we are is more challenging, but it still needs to be the same frame. So, and one example of that is, that's why we're investing in a lot of our technology tutoring partners, right? Like, what does it look like to accelerate one-on-one using a technology platform to do that in ways we couldn't? And how do we connect our young people in ways that we actually couldn't do pre-technology? So, you know, in terms of where we are in our former state, now we've made all these investments. We should at least be moving forward in a way that reflects the shift that we have to take. And so when I think about kind of what makes that relationship work, it's folks who are willing to actually take that same vantage point when we're thinking of solutions, not just kind of bring me what they already have, not realizing that it's not going to fit the bill.
Yeah. I think you've said some profound things. I think the theme of, it's clear to you from your seat when the issues around, and I'll call it broadly, equity, are not centered in the development and even the approach that some of these solutions take, because that's a central concern for you. Heidi, as an entrepreneur, how do you respond to that?
I do want to say, you're right. You're both so right. And you should be pushing your partners. I think everyone in the audience who's an entrepreneur would be agreeing with this, pushing your partners to, it's not one size fits all. So yeah, if you're going to do, first of all, every technology company has to live where your teachers live. So if you've chosen Schoology or you've chosen Google Classroom, that's one of the biggest shifts we've seen in the last few months. Now everyone, it's not an option anymore. They're saying you've got to learn Schoology, you've got to, learn Canvas or Google Classroom. Tools have to live there. If they don't, it's one more thing for your teachers. So that, push your partners hard on that, and also push them on that one-to-one tutoring example. Our teachers need differentiated learning, right? So are the companies you're partnering with there after the sale, right? Are they there and giving 5-minute, screen share support? We shifted to live chat over a year ago. That's not for technical support. That's literally people from the classroom, because PLC meetings, even if they're telling you they're still happening, they're not, right? So teachers aren't getting that professional development anymore. And this is all new to them. So do you have a partner that is willing to get on a screen share 5 minutes at a time to help a teacher along? Those are important things to ask. And there is no, okay, you're going to use the program like this. It's going to be, hey, my tech-averse teachers are going to use it like this. Maybe they're going to use a video response. My little more comfortable teachers who already kind of have the curriculum down are going to use it like this. And then, my tech-savvy 5% of my teachers are going to use it like this. So you have to have a company that you partner with that can flex. And if you don't see that, don't buy it. I mean, that's what we say. We hold ourselves to pretty high standards. So, yeah.
Yes, as do we, and our partners, Heidi.
No, HMH included. We work with a lot of wonderful curriculum. Basically, the LMS and the curriculum that you're using needs to feel like it's air that your teachers are breathing. And if it doesn't, and then the tools need to wrap around that, right? There's only so much a teacher can take on. So it's kind of curriculum and technology fit within that. Yeah.
So Bart, help us zoom out a little bit here and think about this pain, the pain points that are articulated here, others that I know you are intimately aware of, and how we help folks address them, both across the ecosystem, because no one party owns that disconnect, right? So how do we address it, Bart?
Well, it's a big problem. And I'd say we have micro and macro answers there. In 2016 and 2017, we brought together a large group of investors, entrepreneurs, researchers, district leaders, teachers, philanthropists, and policymakers to talk about this problem and what do we do about it. And one of the things that we heard over and over again is that we have what economists call a collective action problem. This occurs when a large number of people all want something to happen, but it's not in anyone's individual interest to take the action. And with education technology, everyone wants to know, what are people doing in other districts? What tools are they using? How did it go? What tips do they have for doing it well, or for how to prepare their environment to succeed? And we launched the Edtech Evidence Exchange as a nonprofit to lead this work, because unless somebody goes out and collects the data, it's not going to collect itself. And so what we need to do most is learn from each other. But right now we have a system in which it's hard to learn from each other, and it's nobody's fault. Everyone is doing their best and they're trying their hardest. But in Baltimore, Sonia, I don't think you would expect 100 of your teachers to take a week of their time out to carefully document everything that they did and what went wrong to benefit a bunch of other districts. But of course, those districts who are buying and implementing the things that you use would kill to know that. So over the long term, we are trying to build a platform that collects this information and aggregates it. We have been running what we call the Edtech Genome Project over the last year that has brought together broad stakeholders, industry, teachers, and many more to try to identify what are the 10 most important implementation variables so that we can all start documenting our work using common language. In the short term, there's no magic bullet. My advice to schools is focus, do fewer things, and however much time you think it takes to properly train and support people, triple it. Everyone is operating at reduced capacity. Everyone is often like a duck. On the surface, they look smooth, but underneath, they're paddling like crazy. The stream is going the other direction. And the stakes are really high. We've seen in the news in recent weeks about the difficulties in Miami, where they tried to bring in a major new platform that didn't go well and had to be reversed at great cost to the teachers and to the students. And I don't know who was involved with that process, but I'm sure that they lacked access to information about other districts just like them who tried to implement that program. So the most important thing that we can all do now is share with each other. And if your peers ask you for advice, give them a little time, try to document and share your work, and hopefully they'll do the same for you.
I think that's extremely wise. I would add to it that we insisting that folks are both on the solutions provider side and on the buyer side are as thoughtful about implementation as they are about purchasing the shiny object, if it were, and thinking about investments that way as well. Good technologies often require you to spend as much on implementing them as you did on buying them. Thinking about that, and also thinking about, to Tom's point, connectivity between solutions, because it simplifies life. So, hey, we're almost at time. I want to give you guys, Heidi, I want to give you one last question here from the audience. I've been working them in throughout. The last question here is, what can colleges of education do to advance the use of technology by teachers and administrators? So what can the schools of ed do?
Yeah, that's question for me. That's a good question. One of our main advisors teaches teachers how to teach writing in Central Michigan University, Dr. Troy Hicks. And there has been a big shift in blending of kind of schools of education technology, maybe not enough. I know that rate of change actually needs to increase from what I'm hearing in the in the K-12, I'm sorry, in the higher ed universe. So yeah, I mean, I guess as much as if you're a Masters of Ed, candidate or someone who's pursuing a higher degree in education, ask your professors for more practical project work in this area. Go to conferences like this, reach out. National Writing Project has a great project we're working on right now on, what is assistive writing technology doing to writing impact. So there's lots of projects going on. You may have to look for it a little bit more yourself if your university isn't providing you with that, but they should be for sure.
And since we have a guy who's at a university, a school of ed, here, what do you think, Bart?
The short answer is good luck trying to make schools of education do things differently. Schools of education are highly disconnected from the competitive pressures of the marketplace. Business schools and law schools compete with each other to have their graduates hired by the top firms, but schools of education generally are in a seller's market because there is such a demand for teachers that if Sonia or Tom goes to their local school of education and says, we want graduates to have better project management or project-based learning skills, they can't credibly make a threat that they're going to hire a bunch of teachers from a different state due to accreditation and licensing. So this is the kind of thing where we need to look to leaders of organizations to advocate more publicly, to put pressure on schools of education to change, because it's probably not going to happen otherwise.
But also enrollments are down, Bart, right? I mean, from what I hear, schools of education are seeing a decline in some parts of the country because, unfortunately, the school districts aren't putting, a bonus on having that title or that accreditation. So
they are, and people are leaving. People are leaving the industry in droves.
This is one angle that we can keep this going. They're giving us the hook here. Thank you guys so much for your insights and your contributions to this important conversation. And to everybody else out there, enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Si el ritmo te lleva a mover la cabeza, ya empezamos como es. Mi música